So if you've been following me for some time, you know that I usually post videos every Monday and Thursday, but sadly last week I did not get to post a Thursday video. That is because I was busy graduating from NYU. I just got my master's in music degree at NYU, and that's why I didn't have as much time to post because I was busy finishing up some projects. And one of the projects I happened to be working on was the recording of my first full-length debut album. So today I'm going to take you through the album recording process and talk about everything that goes into making an album and hopefully inspire you to create your own album. Hey, what's going on everyone? This is Nick. If you're new here, I'm a Brooklyn-based musician, and today we're going to be talking about how exactly do you make an album. So making an 8 or more track album is a really daunting task, and especially for me when I was younger, I was like, I'm never going to have money to go to a studio, I'm never going to have access to a studio, and then finally it actually happened. I'm going to go through all the steps of making an album and share them with you, and hopefully this will help you out. This is especially crucial if you're a DIY musician and you make and write your own music, so you can have something to give out into the world. And today I'm going to be talking about sort of how to record as a full band with everyone playing at the same time, although sometimes that's not the case. Sometimes you'll have the drums and then the bass and everything line up like that. But today we're not going to be talking about that. If you want to hear about that, leave a comment down below. I can make another video on that if you're interested. And if you want to follow the journey and get notified when this album is coming out, check the description. I have a mailing list down there and you can enter your email and I'll update you once a month. But anyway, without further ado, let's get into it. So what I would consider is the first thing is the pre-production phase. This is essentially where you write the music and get the band members, rehearse the music, blah, 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 this and that. It's sort of the same kind of process you would do if you're going to like play a show, for example, with original music or even covers, but really it's just getting everything together. This is probably the step you're most familiar with. And so the first thing to do is basically get all the music together, think of all the songs you potentially want. It's sometimes even better to over-prepare, like I had a few extra songs on there that I can use as singles or that I can kind of eliminate, just so you have options when you're kind of narrowing down your scope. It's also a good idea to have all the arrangements worked out. I didn't really have a producer for this project, I was sort of producing myself, so essentially what I did was I wanted to make sure that all the arrangements were cool, we knew exactly what we were doing in the studio, and we actually came out finishing a little early. And you also want to communicate with the group and just kind of like figure out what works, what doesn't work, get everyone's input and all that stuff. This is also a good time if you're familiar with like microphones and stuff like that, to kind of sort of choose anything you have in particular in mind. Like for example, I really have a specific guitar setup that I really like, so I requested that. And I had some like specific drum requests that I really wanted to try out and some piano requests. So in the pre-production phase, I sort of planned it out this. I studied with the great Kevin Killen for a semester at NYU, and one thing he said is that the mix begins in pre-production. So it's hard to mix something unless it's good from the start. So you want to make sure that everything is sounding great on the way in, rather than trying to fix things later, so you can just focus on the creative process of mixing. Also in the pre-production phase, it's really good to have things that you want to give to the engineer. For example, if you're playing anything to a click track like a metronome, you want to get the exact BPMs and all that stuff. If you have, like, for example, you're playing to some kind of backing track, you want to have the Pro Tools or Logic or whatever file all ready, so that way when you get to the studio, you just like go and start. Then finally, when the pre-production phase is over, then we go into the recording phase or the production phase, where essentially you're going to go into the studio usually for a few hours at a time, and you're going to try to record all those things in the studio. Generally for me, I only like to do 2 or 3 takes of every song and then move on, because I feel like after the second or third take, then you start to make all these weird mistakes. I definitely did. And it's like things that you never made a mistake about before, that you're just like somehow making these mistakes, and then you start to get in your head, and then your confidence gets lowered and the morale gets lowered and all that stuff. So generally I try to avoid doing more than 2 or 3 takes. If I really feel like it needs another take, I'll save it for the end so I can kind of like refresh my mind and get those mistakes out and kind of be in a better place. And so then once everything is recorded, usually you'll do some overdubs or some kind of fixes. Like for example, if the bass player messed up one note, you're gonna go in and punch in and just fix that one note and kind of like edit and stuff like that. And then overdubbing any other instruments, any other kind of cool effects, anything like that. Once all the recording and tracking is over, then we go to the editing phase, where we're essentially kind of fixing the mistakes, kind of changing any errors, and choosing the best takes that you want. One option is you can even cut parts of one take and another take. So for example, in one of my tunes, we're using the intro for the third take, then we're using the solo from the first take, then we're using the sort of interlude from the second take, and then the last part from the third take. And so you're essentially kind of splicing these performances and making one really good, awesome performance, so that way people really enjoy listening to that. It's also like, for example, if you're playing with a singer, getting rid of all of the breaths and all of the kind of weird noises, or like if, for example, like there's like screaming in one track because someone messed up, kind of like going through and fixing the little things. It's not really a creative process, it's really like a more clerical, technical process where you're just kind of cleaning up the audio and making sure everything sounds good and clean. Unless you don't want it, in that case you're going to leave it dirty or even dirty it up more. But anyway, then we go on to the mixing phase, where essentially what you're going to do is make sure that everything sounds nice together and the track is really exciting and nice. So essentially, usually you kind of start off with balancing the faders and trying to experiment with the pan, seeing like, oh, does the bass sound good on the left, or should we keep the bass in the center? Where does the guitar go? Where does the piano go? Where does the vocals go? Where does this go? Etc. and you're just kind of moving things around and then playing with the levels so that way everything is nice and balanced. This is really important so that way everything sounds as good as you intended. Like for example, when you go to a concert and like the sound guy has like the bass really quiet and you're like, oh, where's the bass? I can't hear the bass, or the drums. This is your opportunity to kind of fix that and make it sound exactly like it should sound in your head. It's also going through things like using EQ and compression and different effects to kind of make the music pop and make, like for example, if the guitar is not coming through more, you might want to boost around 1.2k hertz so that way it cuts through a little more, little things like that. Or like let's say the guitar, piano, and the bass are really like playing a lot of low register stuff and it's getting really muddy. It's kind of like mitigating that and so on. And then finally, once the mixing phase is over, then it goes over to mastering. Now essentially what the mastering engineer does is bring up the level to radio ready standards is what they used to call it. Now it's more like stream ready, but essentially you're going to Spotify, you're going to this and that. All of these have specific normalization standards, which essentially means if your audio is not at this level, we're going to make it there. So that could mean louder or quieter. And essentially, like, they're gonna do it in a really dry fashion and you're not gonna have any control over that. So it's better to have someone to get it to their standards so that way you have the control over that and you can kind of choose how it sounds. Back before streaming services, when a lot of people listen to radio, one common thing was to try to get it as loud as possible. There's something called the loudness war where everyone was basically just squashing the dynamics of the song so that way you can boost the entire dynamic level and everything sounds really loud, because humans have this sort of perception that loud is good. So if you hear a loud song, you're more likely to enjoy it than if you heard a quiet song, generally speaking. But essentially now the mastering engineer is going to level off all the tracks. They're going to worry about the fades and how every track leads to the next. Is there space between the track or does it go right into it? Are all the tracks around the same volume so that way when someone's listening in their living room they don't have to keep adjusting their stereo and stuff like that. And then like kind of sometimes they like fix a little errors in the EQ, they like kind of just clear up the whole track. But while mixing engineers work with all the single individual audio files, the mastering engineer usually takes a stereo track. It's like a wave file, just one track, and they're kind of applying things to all of that, typically speaking. Not always. And once the mastering phase is done, your album is ready to be listened to. So then usually what you do nowadays is go through a distribution site like DistroKid or TuneCore or Amuse or CD Baby, something like that. And essentially those things are aggregators, which essentially means they're gonna go out to all of the distributors like Spotify, Apple Music, Tidal, whatever kind of streaming services that they offer. They're all a little different. At this point, you'd probably start releasing some singles and you'd probably start making some promotional videos and stuff like that and some kind of promotional things going on, but that's essentially the process. And then finally the album's out and it's up to you to promote it to the world and get people to listen to what you just made, your kind of musical child. And so essentially that's the whole album recording process. I really hope you found this information useful. The studio footage you saw as B-roll was shot by my friend Jake Diambra, who did an amazing job. If you need any kind of video needs, hit him up because he's awesome. But that's about all I have for you today. I really hope that you've enjoyed this video. If you have any questions about this process or you want to follow along my album journey, leave a comment down below, check out my mailing list, etc. But thank you so much for watching. I hope to see you next time. Take care.